Do you think wine writers truly understand the way most people buy or drink wine?
No. People think that there's this kind of snobbery attached to wine. And perhaps there is amongst our people.
I think there is.
But not for most people. They just go to the shop and they buy, Hardy's Shiraz or, New Zealand Sauvignon. And they're totally happy with it. And they don't have any kind of anxiety about it. I think the anxiety comes at sort of our level, where we don't know how to pronounce Montrachet or that kind of stuff. Between about 30 and 40 pounds, English sparkling wine is actually quite good value compared with champagne of a similar cost. And then I got talking to some of the winemakers, and they're all just such characters. They're all so funny. Some of them are incredibly bitchy, some of them incredibly rude. And that's what never comes out, or very rarely comes out in wine books, is that winemakers are often just complete nutters.
Hi everybody, this is Agnes and welcome to No Sediment Wine Podcast. Today my guest is Henry Jeffries.
Hello.
Hi, and you are a well-regarded wine writer, journalist, a co-host of podcast Intoxicating History.
Yep. We just started before Christmas.
And an author of the book, Wines in a Cold Climate, which was, by the way, personally recommended to me by Jancis Robinson to read.
Yeah, she's been very kind about it.
Yeah. So, hi, how are you?
Well, thank you for coming to London.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining me here for an interview. That's lovely. I actually have really interesting topics prepared today. But before we start, maybe we can talk a little bit about you, your journey into the wine industry, how it all started.
Yes. I come from a family who drink wine, but not I didn't have that experience that a lot of wine writers have, where they have the 1906 Coburn's port with their father, and my father drank wine, but we just drank ordinary wine. I probably got into it when I was at university, and there was a shop called Oddbins, which was this chain of, they've just gone out of business, this chain of wine merchants, and the staff always looked like they were having so much fun. And I didn't know what to do. I'd studied English and classics at university. I just thought, I'll go and work in that shop because they look like they're having fun. And it started there.
Okay. So you started in the wine industry directly. And when did you decide that you also want to write?
Yeah, we had a very long journey to that. So I was sort of 19, 20, 21, something. I got a job in a shop selling wine. I worked there for 2 years. Then I did something completely different. I worked in publishing, books, that sort of stuff. And about 2010, I carried on being interested in wine. I used to go to tastings, public tastings and stuff. And I just thought I had all these thoughts about wine. I was reading lots of sort of Jancis Robinson and older authors, sort of Oberon War. And I just had all these ideas. And so I started a blog about wine called Henry's World of Booze, and just tried to approach it in a irreverent, accessible way. And it sort of, it kind of caught on. And I was offered a job doing a wine column for a magazine called The Lady, which was edited by Boris Johnson's sister, oddly, Rachel Johnson, who is a media personality over here. And she invited me in and said, do you want a wine column? And I said, I don't really know very much about wine. And she goes, brilliant, you'll be perfect. So I did that for about 5 years. And then eventually I stopped the publishing job and did a book called Empire of Booze, which was about British history and drink. And I've been a kind of jobbing wine writer, whiskey. I had a job for a bit editing a whiskey blog. So I've done, juggled lots of different things to try and keep my head above water writing about drink.
I actually have a few questions prepared about that topic as well, and I hope we will have time. I think it's really fascinating. But you mentioned the book that you wrote, and now it is kind of evolved into sort of a podcast.
Yes, I've been trying to I did this book, Empire of Booze, British History Through the Bottom of a Glass. And it's one that came out in 2016, 2017. And it didn't do very well, but it kept on turning over. And I'd get messages from people saying that they enjoyed it. And for ages, I thought it would make a great radio program or television program, in Porto or Jerez or, Jamaica and stuff, talking about British influence on drink. The kind of sort of fun stories, but also the kind of dark side as well. Never happened, just television changed a lot.
Yeah,
and,
that's fair.
And then I was approached by a television producer who has moved into podcasting earlier last year, maybe the year before. And she said, you should do a podcast. You should do one called, we came up with the name Intoxicating History. And then we were trying to find the right person to do it with. So it had to be somebody who is quite professional, because I'm not. So we wanted someone who had done lots of broadcasting. We wanted someone who was fun, intelligent, but also not an egomaniac. Because
there's a lot of those.
Because there's a lot of in the industry, not just in wine, but someone who would just who would be good to sort of bounce ideas off. And she suggested, after we came up with a few names, Tom Parker Bowles, who is the Queen of England's son, but he's also an extremely good award-winning food writer, and he's done a lot of food television. He's been a judge on MasterChef and things like that. So he's quite well known, but also he's not an egomaniac. So Tom and I knew each other a little, but not well. And we met up for lunch and we got on really well. And then we started doing them. We got Taylor's Port to sponsor the first series.
Perfect.
Which is the perfect match, kind of Britain, drink, history. Obviously Taylor's have got it all. So they stumped up some money for 20 episodes. We've just started releasing them. So we did 4 before Christmas. We've got another 16 coming out. And it's been good. We're still finding our feet, getting to know each other a bit. We're not as slick as you are, but we're getting there.
Okay, great. But today we really discussed that we will be talking about a bit of finances, and we will start probably with the British sparkling wine industry, which is this book based on. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Not just sparkling wine, there's still.
Yeah, still. And I will have probably a few questions regarding that as well. But I wanted to ask you, the English sparkling wine has established itself as a serious category on its own and has a reputation for high quality. However, as we discussed, prices can be very high. What factors make British sparkling wine more expensive than certain champagne houses, do you think?
Yield. The yield is about half or 2/3 what it is in champagne. So the first thing. Labour costs are higher. All the equipment has to be imported from France, mainly. But then you've also got the land prices are a lot lower. So, obviously you're not paying €1 million a hectare.
This is what I was thinking, yeah.
You're paying about £30,000 a hectare for really good vineyard land. The problem is that you've got all the startup costs. So with most champagne houses, those were paid off, in, 1890 or something. But in England, they're still paying off all the startup costs. And also there's, they have to charge a high price. But also, and obviously the production process is the same as champagne. So it involves sitting on a load of wine for 18 months, 3 years, 4 years, which is obviously very capital intensive. But also you're making something that is made in the image of champagne from champagne grapes, often with champagne consultants, with champagne bottles. You go for the champagne price, because you can. And I think, to be honest, some of them are overpriced, but between about £30 and £40, I think English sparkling wine is actually quite good value compared with champagne of a similar cost. So for £40, that's Moet, something like that, you can get an organic, handmade sparkling wine, proper sort of from one vineyard, made by one person, beautiful, kind of complex, interesting kind of grower champagne type flavours. I'm thinking of a particular one, Langham in Dorset, for £40 a bottle, which I think compared with champagne is pretty good value. So it's expensive, but I think it's expensive for a reason. And if people are prepared to spend that on champagne, then they probably should be prepared to spend it on English sparkling wine.
Okay, because the next question, actually, you already answered, but I will still read it out. Do you think it offers good value for money compared to champagnes and other traditional method sparkling wines?
Not at the bottom end. I think at the bottom end, you'd be better off getting champagne. So, all those cooperatives in champagne that turn out, pretty solid wines for 15, 20 euros a bottle or something like that. I think England can't compete with that. But I think the sweet spot is that kind of £30 to £50 one. And then there's some kind of quite silly ones that are, £200 or £300, which I just don't really think the quality justifies that kind of pricing. But the pricing is to get attention. It's to sort of plant a flag saying we can make wine that sells for £200 a bottle. But I think the next sweet spot are the kind of sort of premium, sort of Blanc de Blancs, Blanc de Noirs from people like Black Chalk. For I think they're about £60, sort of single vintage ones. And they're really exceptional quality, and they taste different. They don't taste a lot like champagne. They have a real kind of bright, fruity purity, which I think, for me, tastes distinctively English. But without, some English wines can be too acidic for me. They are always high acidity, and sometimes they can be too high. But I think that people are learning how to get the grapes riper and getting that purity of fruit, but without the over-the-top acidity.
You mentioned vintage, and this is something that I have realized for myself when it comes to British sparkling wines. I think vintage matters a lot, more than in champagne for sure, because you can have these sunny, beautiful summers, and then the wine just shines in the glass. And then when you have this kind of gray weather through the summer, then it can be really acidic.
It can be really acidic, yeah. And so the 2020s, a lot of them are just coming on the market now, and they're just superb. But I think most people really should do a non-vintage just to kind of even out the bad years. But having said that, 24 was, as in a lot of France, was an awful vintage. And I tasted recently with this Irishman in Sussex called Dermot Sugru, and the wines were low in alcohol. The yields were awful, but they tasted good. The Van Clair, whatever they're called. So the ripeness was there, even though the alcohol was down and the yields were down. So I think they're getting better at dealing with the climate.
Okay. Do you think England is one of the areas that could benefit from the global climate change?
Yeah, well, it already has.
Yeah.
Let's not beat around the bush. It's been, you obviously get things like, mild winters can mean you get the bud break, and then you get the frost and that kind of stuff. But generally, having a warmer summer means that you can make still wines now, and you can make still wines from French grapes in a way that was pretty much impossible 20 years ago.
Okay. And talking about the still wines, so do you think that they could offer more affordable entry point into the British wines, or are they facing similar costs?
Yeah, the problem is the still wines are much cheaper than the sparkling wines, and I think that's where the real problem is. So you can get a really nice Chardonnay from Essex. Essex is the county just above London. It's the eastern. It's dry. It's got kind of clay soils. You can get some very nice Chardonnays and even some nice red Pinot Noirs. So expensive, it's like £40 for the red, 30 for the Chardonnay, and that's, and then you look at what you can get from Burgundy, especially a white from Burgundy. You can get a lovely Macon or something for £15. So I think that the still wines are going to struggle unless costs can come down, or quality can just be so exceptional that people will buy it instead of Burgundy, instead of like a Bellini Montrachet or something like that.
Can you direct me to the shop where can you buy Macon for 15 quid?
You could get them from...
Burgundy for me has been just out of the reach, and it's even like the village, or the regional Burgundy is like...
You could get a kind of Macon Village from Majestic or something for... or the kind of wine society's own label, but white Burgundy, really quite nice ones. They're not fancy, they're probably made by co-ops and things like that, but they're, good quality.
Because
you're moving on a different scale to me. You're kind of on the sort of rarefied fine wine level. I'm thinking of just,
But still, that has been huge issue for me with Burgundy for the last 2-3 years.
Well, maybe this is where England will come in. This is an opening for the English, because Essex is the place where Chardonnay and Pinot Noir really thrive. So if it can establish a name for itself. And in fact, there's a Californian company, Jackson Family Vineyards, who bought lots of land up there. So I think it'll need some marketing. Okay. Whereas I think with the sparkling wine, it's easier because it looks like champagne, tastes like champagne a bit. It can achieve the same cost. But Chardonnay is harder, isn't it? Because okay, maybe not, you can't.
And you get so much like from outside.
Yeah, New Zealand, Australia, they make great Chardonnay. So it's that's tricky.
Yeah. Okay. But if we are looking on the financial situation from the winemaker's perspective, you already mentioned that British sparkling wine producers are dealing with the young industry. So they all had to invest from the very beginning, the technology and stuff. But what are some of the biggest financial challenges they face currently?
Well, I think the biggest problem, and I'm not sure if it's specifically a financial one, is that there's probably too much wine. So everyone has been planting and planting and planting.
That's not just the problem for British sparkling winemakers. It's for everyone, I guess.
Yes. And I think that, and most of production, something like 90%, sells domestically. But I read some statistic, like every year production goes up by, I can't remember what it was. It was like 20% or something. And sales go up by 3% or 5% or something like that. So that is the biggest problem. And then everybody has, they've invested heavily, they've borrowed, they've taken on investors, and most people aren't seeing a return on it yet. So I think lots of the companies are in, I wouldn't quite say financial trouble, but there's a lot of them that they're looking for more investment. They're kind of on the market, but not officially on the market. I think a lot of the English wine boom happened at a time of very low interest rates. So you had the financial crash, 2007, 2008, central banks put interest rates down to pretty much zero. So people could borrow money really, really cheaply, or people who already had money, they were like, how do we see a return on it? I know, I'll put it into English sparkling wine, and then 7 years later, I'll start making some money. And now interest rates are much, much higher. It's harder to get hold of money to invest, to keep production turning over, to keep... you have a good vintage like 2023 or large vintage, and then you need more bottles and you need more tanks, and then you can't sell it for 3 years. So I think a lot of people are sort of beginning to realize that the payoff is not going to happen for a long time, and they're trying to get out.
Yes. No, it's just there's this old joke. How to become a millionaire in the wine industry, or the winemaking industry.
Yeah, start with 2 million or something.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something exactly what you said. Like I think this is.
But it's not necessarily a problem, because I think most wineries in California don't make any money. I haven't looked into their books, but a lot of them are vanity projects, and they're run by rich people who made a lot of money in the film business or tech or something, and then they go to a vineyard and they want to make money at some point, but they don't really care when. So as long as you've got enough of these people, does it matter? But I think at the moment, all those people who put money in are now sort of thinking, I didn't realize I had to put that much money in. Do I have to keep reaching into my pocket?
Yes.
So we're at that. Yes. So we're at that stage. We're at that stage now. But I think there'll be, it's not a disaster. Lots of people will go out of business. There'll be a lot of consolidation. There'll be a lot of companies changing hands. But I think the foundations are there, and the product is there. So I think it'll look different in however many years, but you'll still have English wine. It's not going to disappear.
Yeah, that's true. But I also wanted to ask you about the Brexit, how that has impacted the industry, because I remember in my really small market, we used to have few labels here and there. We don't have anymore, because it's just nightmare to import, it has been really difficult. So just people don't.
Yes, no, it's made exporting to the European Union a lot harder. It's made importing the equipment, because most of it comes from France and Italy, a lot harder. Yes, it's made things. So it's been in some ways better, I think, for the bigger people, because they have the economies of scale. They can employ someone to do the paperwork. Whereas if you're kind of the little winemaker in Sussex or something, who used to send, your wine to Latvia, and it just, someone used to turn up in a van, or whatever. I'm not quite sure how it would have worked. That can't happen anymore. It needs to be done professionally, all the forms filled out, everything in triplicate. So it's made things a lot harder. Having said that, most of the bigger companies export to Scandinavia, not just Norway, but Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and do really, really well with it. The Scandinavian market is probably the biggest market, the strongest market for English wine. So I think all the worst things have happened, and people have moved into the new normal, which is more complicated. But I think that's now built in, and you'd have to ask them. But people seem quite confident about exporting to Scandinavia now.
Okay, because I sometimes think you said that 90% of the wines are sold locally, so it can be quite volatile in that case if you are not diversifying your markets. I don't know, but I guess you know what I mean by this, that you're really relying on one specific market only.
I think it's much, much harder to export to the US. So people just say,
and with the volumes,
with the volumes, and then also each state is basically a different country. Yes. So, and they said that they would. I think before COVID, lots of people were doing quite well, but you need someone on the ground, going around restaurants, hosting tastings. You need to keep hitting it again and again, and so that's one that people struggle with. So I think that the big export markets are Scandinavia, Taiwan, Japan.
Okay.
But they require a lot of work. But I think you're right. I think you can't rely on the home market, especially as this country is in a hell of a mess economically. I suppose like a lot of European countries, and I think we are technically in a recession. I think so that kind of no one feels like celebrating at the moment, and that's what English sparkling wine is based on. It's based on pop celebration, that kind of stuff. So you need to diversify.
Yeah. But given the rising production costs, is it possible to make British sparkling wine both affordable and financially sustainable? Or is it destined to always be premium product?
I think premium is probably the way to go, but there are people making Charmat method, so Prosecco style sparkling wines, which get the old guard, the champagne type people really angry. They hate them. But people can make them for £14 and they're selling in Marks and Spencer's £14. They're quite nice. They're not exciting. They're not, kind of brioche and almonds and orange peel and stuff, but they're good, honest sparkling wines. They're better than cheap Prosecco. I mean, cheap Prosecco is not normally that good. It's sort of sweet and sort of basic. The English equivalent is a bit more expensive, but I'd say it's better quality. So I think it is possible, and I think people are doing it. There's this huge company based up in Kent who are planning to make 4 million bottles a year of everything. So sort of high-end champagne-style wines, Charmat method, everything. And they're hugely ambitious. And the Charmat stuff is good. It's, if you had ordered it in a bar for £30 a bottle or something, you'd be delighted.
Actually, what I wanted to ask you, do you think there should be more support from the state?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. The state are, they don't really care. They don't care about small English industries. The tax regime on English wine, or not on English wine, and wine in general, has just been revised to make it horrendously complicated, and the industry were lobbying for years. So it was something that was put in place by the last government, but they had such complaints about it that they paused it, and then the new government came in and it just said this system that makes absolutely no sense at all and will lead to huge amounts of paperwork for wine producers. Yeah, we'll do that. And so it means that there's different rates of duty, I think, per 0.1% of alcohol. So they have to do different paperwork for all their wines. So if you're a wine merchant or a wine producer, and it means that wines above, I think, 13% have much higher duty on them. So I think the government don't care. And I think, the Wine GB, who are the trade body, they spend a lot of time trying to lobby the government. And I just think it's a waste of time. I just think they're hopeless.
So it's impacting all the farmers, because yesterday we saw there was not tractors on the street and like huge noise, and is that part of that?
That's part of that. So you used to be able to. So farmland was treated differently to normal assets. So if you had like a load of gold or something, and you died and wanted to pass that on to your children, above a certain amount you had to pay a lot of tax. But land was considered different. Farmers were considered the sort of stewards of the land, and you could pass on a certain amount of land, either with, I don't know the exact figures, but either with very low duties or no duties at all.
Okay.
And that has been completely changed so that you have to pay, I think, over like a sort of £1 million worth, which is actually not a particularly big farm. It sounds like a huge amount, but if you've got a farm, you will have land that's worth a lot of money, but you can't actually do very much with it. It's not like you've got all the money in the bank. It's like having a house or something. And now you have to pay, I think, 40% duties when you die, which will mean smaller producers will all have to sell up because they can't pay that kind of bill. So it'll end up with basically the big farms, big producers buying up the little ones.
Yes.
Exactly. I don't know the exact kind of, but it screws the small farmers.
Okay. So it's similar to what's happening in France.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what's happening in France, but the French farmers are always angry, aren't they?
Yeah, because it's sometimes, I think, I also don't necessarily know per se, but I think it's sometimes, it kind of helps the big guys.
Yeah, I tend to think that when the government get involved in kind of industries and stuff, they do tend to make things worse. So I just...
somehow that's always the case. So I actually am ready to move to the wine writing part. But is there something that I did not ask you regarding the English wine industry, or that you should want to talk about?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. I was approached to do the book by a publisher, so it wasn't my idea.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, from the outside, English wine, I think, looks quite corporate. It's very kind of branded and sort of, I always joke about branded gilets, but like, little body warmers with the name of the winery on and that kind of stuff, fleeces and stuff. And it looked like accountancy firms. It looked like legal firms. I just thought it didn't look very fun. So I didn't really want to do the book. And then I got talking to some of the winemakers, and they're all just such characters. They're all so funny. Some of them are incredibly bitchy. Some of them are incredibly rude. And I just got talking to them. I was like, these people are brilliant. These people they're like a soap opera. Why would you, and that's what never comes out, or very rarely comes out in wine books, is that winemakers are often just complete nutters, and you just want to get those characters on the page. So I'm not I'm not an MW student. I don't know a lot about the technical side, but I think I have an eye for a character. And I was just there, like, going around all these wineries, just going, I can't believe he said that, So that's basically what I've tried to get across. So
do they feel comfortable that you have written it all? So everyone knows.
Some of them were a bit, some of them were a bit, they're all still talking to me.
Okay,
put it that way, yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes when I do interviews, I usually ask them, are you sure that I published this? Yeah, you go ahead. But that's true. I was reading this book and I haven't finished it yet. But I remember in a few parts, reading alone in a quiet room and kind of giggling a little bit. So yes, it's a nice read. I also wanted to touch upon the subject of wine writing. And there are two particular aspects I want to focus on. And one of them is, do you think wine writers truly understand the way most people buy or drink wine?
No, not at all. No, I think we live in a very rarefied world where we're talking about wine. Most people don't talk about wine; they just drink it. And there's this very funny attitude that you have amongst wine writers, where you'll have someone who's quite new to wine writing, and they'll come in and just sort of go, people think wine is really snobby, and wine is only drunk by people with red noses and red trousers and old school ties and stuff. And it's like, have you been to a supermarket? Have you been to Asda, which is a big chain of supermarkets? It's full of wine, and it's full of ordinary people drinking wine. So it's not, wine in England is Britain is normal. You know, it's a very normal thing to drink. It's not a normal thing to talk about. But it is, there isn't, people think that there's this kind of snobbery attached to wine. And perhaps there is amongst our people.
I think there is.
But not for most people. They just go to the shop and they buy, you know, Hardy's Shiraz or, you know, New Zealand Sauvignon, and they're totally happy with it. And they don't have any kind of anxiety about it. I think the anxiety comes at sort of our level, you know, where we don't know how to pronounce Montrachet or, you know, or that kind of stuff. But I think for the vast majority of people, wine is just something they enjoy.
Yeah, but I think there is a snobbery. There's definitely, I sometimes feel the same, like, I sometimes feel this thing, like, through myself. People come to me and they ask for advice, what kind of wine you would suggest me to buy, and then they name specific supermarkets. I don't remember the last time I have bought a wine in a supermarket.
Yeah.
So even though I try to be, you know, as much as possible to kind of take away that snobbery when you talk about wine, you know, discuss several myths, I realize that I don't buy wine in a supermarket. And I don't know how about you, and maybe you can elaborate on that. But as a wine industry representative, I usually have huge discounts for wine. You know, everyone knows I go there and I get specific bottles that might be allocated and some people might not get or might not even see. So even with not knowing or not wanting to, you are kind of isolated from the real world.
Yeah, and I think so. I suppose it's the kind of difference between, you know, high-end cookery and everyday food, you know, and the two don't really have very much to do with each other. I think I'm a bit different because I do buy wine in the supermarket. I do buy wine at...
Okay, so I really...
Yeah. And, you know, last year I wrote some columns for the Guardian, and they are very strict. You have to recommend some affordable wines. And I know a lot of wine writers would find that pretty much impossible. You know, it would just be that, you know, Croatian pet nat that there's only one bottle in the whole country or something like that. Whereas I like drinking quite ordinary wine. I like drinking Gigao Côte d'Or. You know, I think
that's great.
Yeah, I like drinking, and I love doing the columns because I loved finding those bottles that you could buy everywhere that had a bit of character. And I think that's the trick, really, to try and kind of to get people to think about wine a bit more, is to find those ones.
Yeah. No, can I just redeem myself a little bit? I'm not about the expensive wines. I actually like to look for value, but I realize that I don't buy my wines in the supermarkets. I usually go to the like specialized wine shops, and unfortunately.
I mean, I do too. You know, I visit. I buy a lot of wine from the Wine Society, or there's a wine merchant called Yap Brothers who do I love the Rhone, and they specialize in the Rhone, so I buy it from them. But not expensive. I've got 2 children, you know, I don't have a lot of money to spend on wine. So I'm always looking for something that's under, you know, whatever the equivalent is, under 20 euros or something like that.
Okay. Another question I wanted to ask you, do you think sometimes wine writers hold back on criticism when reviewing well-established brands, either out of caution or, you know, industry pressure?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's
Do you?
I do. I'm very rarely negative about a specific wine because the ones that people are rude about are often the ones that ordinary people like. So, you know, you're sort of, you know, you could be rude about Barefoot Zinfandel or something like that, you know, the best-selling wine in America. You could say it's kind of sweet and jammy or whatever, but sort of what would be the point? And then with this sort of, but you're probably thinking more of kind of prestigious names, aren't you? Yeah, yes. being rude about prestigious names. Yeah, I think people want to get invited to things, don't they? They want to get invited to the top table. They want to get those chateau visits and things like that. So they're not going to be rude. I think that's a real problem in the industry, and it's becoming more of a problem because I think this is something we're going to come on to, isn't it? It's so hard to make any money doing it. And a lot of wineries or AOC committees or not committees, what are they called? You know, like the sort of organizations, they have publicity money. You know, they might pay you to do a masterclass, or they might pay you to do this, or to write something for copy for their website, or that kind of stuff. So there's so little money that nobody wants to make any enemies, because you never know, you never know who might sort of pay you to do something. So the sort of days of those consumer champions, sadly, I think they're kind of coming to an end. You've still got your independent publications, hopefully, but even then, most of them are sort of thinking about advertising and stuff. So I think it does worry me quite a lot. Because in England, all the newspapers used to have a wine columnist, and I remember talking to Tim Atkin, and he was saying that he was paid something like, this was 2009, £40,000 a year, which then was a really good, I mean, it's pretty good living now, but then was a really good living. And he was totally independent. He went where he wanted. Not totally, because he did go on press trips and stuff, but he wouldn't be taking any money from any third-party organisation. And now, I think there's Jenna Jansis at the FT, Jay McQuitty at the Times, but most of them, they don't pay enough to live on. So you have to put on events in conjunction with a sherry company or that kind of stuff. So no one wants to make any enemies.
Yeah.
So I think it's a massive problem.
So the other aspect of financial sustainability you just mentioned of wine writing is that many wine writers juggle multiple roles. So writing, consulting, judging. Do you think it's now possible to survive alone?
It's not possible. No, not to be a wine writer. I've tried and failed. And so I gave up my job in publishing from 2015 to 2018 and made a living just writing books, articles for newspapers, and I was earning about half what I was earning when I was in publishing, and publishing is notoriously badly paid. So it was impossible. And then, so 2018, I got a job working for a whiskey retailer, doing a sort of whiskey blog for them, writing what's known as content, just sort of, Glenfiddich has a new whiskey out, let's talk about that. And I did that off and on, to begin with full-time and then part-time for 5 years. And they were really good. They let me take time off to write a book, go down to 3 days a week to write a book. And that was an absolute lifesaver financially. But it also kind of opened my eyes to what else I could do. So, writing copy for wine merch. So I write, blogs, guides to things for various wine merchants. My podcast is sponsored by a port company, Taylor's. So I've just sort of realised that there isn't really any other way, sadly.
Yes, but you mentioned whiskey, and this is something that I've noticed. I think there's more kind of money in the spirits industry.
A lot more money, yeah.
Yes, than in the wine.
There's because you have those huge companies, you have Diageo that owned Johnny Walker and Smirnoff and stuff, and their marketing budgets are just beyond what anyone in wine can have, because they are a consistent branded product, whereas that's very hard to do in wine. So if you think wine writers are difficult to trust, you should be whiskey writers, because because there's so much money that nobody in whiskey will say anything bad, because they might have Diageo or someone just being like, wheelbarrow of money coming over to do something. So, you could do, whiskey companies often produce books. So you could get paid extremely well to do a book on a certain distillery or that kind of stuff. So there's no real criticism. There's sort of, you get kind of vague criticisms like, the industry could be more inclusive or something like that. But there's no specific criticism at a company or a product, because there's just too much money. People don't want to miss out.
I just remembered what I wanted to ask you. I thought about the criticism, and like in the theater, or movies industry, and then in food industry, I feel that people are kind of more openly criticizing and feel more comfortable. And somehow, as you said, in the spirits industry and in the wine industry, we're really afraid to not be invited to the next event. Like, why do you think it is the case? Like, why do we feel more open to criticize? Like, the official critics of the movies as well, you know, or the cinema or theater or food, restaurants, they're more open, no? Or it's just...
I'd have to think of the kind of structural problems, the reasons behind that. So I suppose for wine, you need to, if you want to have lots of interesting things to say, you need to go on kind of trips to visit vineyards. Whereas if you want to have interesting things to say about film, all you have to do is watch a film. Or if you want interesting things about restaurants, all you have to do is go to a restaurant. Whereas I think with wine, you really, it's helpful to go out to Provence or, you know, or the Barossa Valley or something. And for that, you either need a big private income or you need the wine company to pay for it. So you're going to temper your criticism because of that. I think we rely on the industry more than film or food people. Yeah. That's just my off-the-cuff explanation. But I would love it. I'd love to have my own, be financially secure and just write what the hell I wanted about wine and go and visit places on my own. Yeah, and just, you know, just write and just be really on, you know, not be gratuitously rude. But I think in the book, I think I've tried to be as absolute honest as possible. And I think it helped that I was in England because I could just visit people myself. I wasn't beholden really to any PR people. I would just phone up the winery and go and visit, and, you know, much, much smaller industry. But I think we're probably too much in bed with the wider industry, which is a shame.
Yeah, I think Andrew Jefford told me that he believes that wine writers are too connected with the winemakers, like too close friends sometimes, you know, and how could you write something bad about the wine that your friend has made? Yeah. Like, it's also kind of a bad move, I guess. And so maybe we're too much connected.
I think we are. I think you really want sort of, you know, people who are less involved, people who could be more dispassionate, people who just don't care about making enemies, you know, just people with kind of hard hearts, you know, who can just say exactly what they think, but from a position of knowledge. You know, I don't really know if there's anybody doing that. Can you think of anyone who's...
No, just some bad TikTokers could just talk whatever, just without much knowledge as well. I don't think that's what we're looking for.
No, I think it needs to be, you know, someone sort of, you know, people who are as intelligent and thoughtful as Andrew Jefford, but without being so close. I'm not saying that he is unusually close, but he admits that he's... It's very hard not to get friendly with winemakers. You know, they're interesting people and they're giving you wine.
Yeah, you know? And then you're all together intoxicated.
Yeah.
You
become, and I think that's, you know, so that's, you know, that's part of the fun of it. But perhaps it's not all so good for the end customer who wants to know exactly what's in the wine.
So maybe the final consumer should be the paying part through the Patreon, through sponsorship, and then I actually thought about that when I created my YouTube channel, that to stay independent, like the final consumer or customer should be paying you instead of getting the sponsored videos by others.
Yeah. Well, I've just started doing Substack, which is, you know, like blogging.
Yeah.
I have to pay content for that. So I have my 3,000 subscribers and about 5% of those are paid. So, you know, it's not a living, but it helps. So perhaps that's the future. You will have people who would just pay directly for that kind of stuff.
For the honest content.
For the honest content. But the problem is that you still need the access, you know, and you still need the kind of visits to wineries and stuff. So you need to make a lot of money to be... I do know some wine writers who don't do press trips. So I've got a friend who's a wine writer in Catalonia, sort of up in the hills, Priorat. I think he just writes about Catalan wine and he visits people, you know, in his car, and he doesn't do press trips or anything like that.
Is that financially sustainable?
I think he does a bit of IT on the side. Actually, no, he's very funny. He's called Miguel Houden, and he is not afraid to make enemies.
Okay, that's cool.
I think he's incredibly rude, not only about wine, but about other wine writers and stuff as well. So,
Okay, so one last question. No, actually, one last question before the last question. Do you think wine writing needs to adapt to a new generation of readers who engage with contents differently?
It does, yeah. I'm not the person to do it, but I've just read so many terrifying articles about how we're moving into a kind of post-literacy generation, and people are just far more drawn to images and stuff, whereas we were kind of brought up on words. And I think you will see a huge shift to that, and I think you're already seeing a huge shift to that. People whose medium is entirely visual rather than words on a screen. So I think it's already happening, and I'm frightened the hell out of me because I feel like I'm such a dinosaur.
But you know what? It was interesting. For a while, everyone said that we are moving towards the short form videos. But for example, myself, my YouTube channel is actually the longer videos are the ones that are more successful.
Yeah.
So maybe the attention span is not that short after all.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be really good to hear, because I think I wouldn't say, books are finished, but I think you've got a declining readership of people who really want to engage with the whole book. But if, long form video, long form podcasts, can fill that gap, then perhaps it's not the end of the world.
No, I don't think so. No, I know I have a few friends who have written books as well, and they've been hugely successful. Okay, we're a really small market, but still. So I have a hope for all of that. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, for sure. And then I have one more question that I ask every single one of my guests. But apparently I don't pronounce the word as well. So what is the one wine myth you would like to debunk?
Oh, there's so many of them.
You can debunk many.
I think the one about putting a spoon in the top of a sparkling wine to keep the fizz in, that annoys
silver spoon.
It annoys me so much. You go to someone's house and they've got a spoon in there. In fact, there's a winemaker in the book called Peter Hall, and he goes, yeah, the myth that putting a silver spoon, a bottle of champagne keeps the fizz in, was put about by the powerful spoon lobby.
Okay, that's good. I don't think we have heard that. But we are also starting a new part of our videos, kind of to connect one guest with another guest, and maybe help viewers to stay on No Sediment Podcast longer. So the idea is that you introduce a strong opinion of wine or wine industry, and then we will read that to the next guest, and he or she will need to he or she will need to approve or disapprove of that, and then maybe elaborate on it. I'm sorry, you are the first one, so I don't have a strong...
My view is that amongst alcoholic drinks, wine isn't uniquely special. So I think all wine people think that wine is just the most, there's no drink that has the kind of cultural heft, that has the interest, has the history that wine has. And but the funny thing is, if you talk to beer people or whiskey people, they say exactly the same thing. And as I'm someone who drinks across and writes across various types, everyone says that theirs is uniquely special, and I think that wine. But furthermore, I think wine there is a danger with wine that by keeping separate from other forms of alcohol, we don't do ourselves any favors. So, for example, there's a lot of move towards stricter legislation about alcohol, kind of warnings on bottles, minimum prices and stuff. And a lot of people in wine are very blasé about it. They go, "Oh, wine's different, we will," and it's like they don't care. For them, it's all alcohol, and the kind of prohibitionists are coming for wine as much as whiskey and beer. So I think by kind of remaining aloof from other alcoholic drinks, we're not doing ourselves any favors. And I think the alcohol industry, including people who make Carlsberg or sort of ordinary lager. Carlsberg's quite nice lager, but we need to sort of accept we're all in it together and kind of fight the prohibitionists.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect.
So that's kind of two things.
Yeah. We will break that down. And I have one last thank you.
Oh, wow.
So this is No Sediment cap. The next time you go into the vineyards and maybe you want some help, maybe you want to help the winemakers with some harvest or
this is
gentle
wonderful.
pruning, then yeah. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you.